I want to welcome you back to Enemy of My Truth. And today I'm looking forward to sharing this week's conversation with you as I'm sitting down with Kim Case, a psychic medium from Cape Elizabeth, Maine. I was so excited to connect with Kim and spend time talking about her personal journey into this work, how her mediumship abilities first began to unfold, the experiences that shaped her path, and what stepping into this calling looks like for her today. And before we dive in, a quick note: our microphone was not exactly cooperating during this recording, so you may notice the audio is a little off at times. Classic Mercury retrograde in full effect. Thank you for your patience as you listen. And in this episode, we talk openly about the very real and human side of this work, the devotion it requires, the growth it continuously asks of us, and the moments that can feel challenging or uncertain as we learn to trust what we're sensing and perceiving. This work constantly asks us to show up. It keeps us humble, and it reminds us that we are never finished understanding or learning how we connect with the non-physical world. There is a deep level of honesty and heart in Kim's story, and I have so much respect for the way she continues to honor her path. Most of all, this conversation speaks to the courage it takes to truly step into our truth. The kind of courage Kim has embodied in choosing to trust her abilities and walk this path with integrity. I am so excited to share this with you today. Let's dive in. Good morning, Kim. I am so glad that you're here today. And I want to welcome you to the podcast. And I want to introduce you to my audience and talk a little bit about the journey you've been on to step into who you are today as a psychic medium and a mentor, and all the parts that you have stepped into the work you're doing today. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Kim, as you stepped into this work and as I've gotten to know you and have watched your journey, if we go back, when did you first realize you were sensitive in the way that felt different perhaps from other people? And I guess how far back can you go thinking of that? And I say, even before we have language for something, we have a knowing, we have a feeling, we just can never necessarily put our finger on it. But kind of bring us back to the beginning of bringing yourself into this journey.
Hi, Anne. Yes, I'd love to share. So I think probably the first inkling that I got that I was different was probably when I was quite young and picking up the emotions of others around me and entering into rooms and feeling immediately, oh, that person is sad, or oh, that person is angry, and being frightened with them. Um, and I would say that that is probably the first time that I became aware of my empathic side and sensitivity. Um, my mom would always look at me strangely because ambulances would go by and I'd start sobbing in empathy for whatever was happening inside. Um, so uh, I don't recall actually ever seeing spirit, though my mom would occasionally talk to me about people that would come to visit her. She would tell me many stories of talking to her mom or someone who would come and visit her, and then she'd get a phone call later that day that they had passed. Um, I didn't actually seeing a whole lot of spirit until later. The next time that that I had an inkling was when I was about 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old. I had an extremely strange experience, and maybe Anne, you can give me a clue as to what was going on because I actually haven't spoken to anybody about this in years. Was I was about 3 or 4 years old. We were staying at our family summer house in New Hampshire, and I was left to had to sleep on my own. I could hear the adults talking in the other room, and the light was on in my room, and I looked up, and in the rafters was a little blue mouse with
Mm.
wings, and it was neon blue, and I can still see it to this day. And I know I didn't make this up. It was like nothing else I'd ever seen. And of course, I let out a blood curdling scream. My father ran in and was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I was like, "That's a blue mouse. It's a blue mouse." And he just, of course, had no idea what to do with that concept or idea, and told me I was, oh, you must have been dreaming. But I know that I had seen this incredible magical creature. Um, and I think it opened up for me at this time that, oh, maybe there's more going on in the world than I thought there was. And I still don't know how to place that within the context of my understanding of the universe. Other than that, it's a magical place.
Well, yeah, and you sharing that, it's incredible because I think those moments happen for us and we never forget that. There's a timestamp in our energy when we have those moments of knowing what we saw, knowing what we experienced, but it's very hard to try to validate that or even have the courage to share it
Mm,
with somebody. Maybe years later, we're finally like, I got to share something. And one of the things I look at, Kim, and you let me know that I find the majority of people that I work with, whether they're clients or students, that when we start to open up and see, it's usually because there are things active in our in home environment, our environment that can be emotional, that can
mm,
be putting us through challenges that almost step forward to show us that we are not alone, although it can have the opposite effect and be very
mhm,
startling. But it's as though our higher self is trying to soothe, trying to let us know that there's more than what's just here, the things that are painful or that we're stepping into. So if you go back to when you're 3 or 4 in that time frame, I wonder if there would have been some challenges within the home of
mhm,
you feeling that, even having the people over that night and you remember being in your room, maybe there were things happening for you and being as sensitive as you are and as you were. I wonder
mhm.
if that was a time period for you that you would remember or recall going through that.
Yeah, it's possible. Anything for sure. At the time, I thought it was a happy evening of having guests over, and we were having fun over the summer. But yeah, it's possible. Um, yeah, I mean, that's a rabbit hole we could go down.
Right, sure. And like why we see the things that we see and why some people see certain things. And as you're talking about seeing, I want to make this clear too, that you're seeing it with your physical eyes versus in your mind's eye.
Mhm.
You're able to see. You were,
Uh,
yeah, when you were younger.
um, it felt like I was. I'm not sure when I was younger that I could have told you the difference, right?
Right,
'Cause,
right.
yeah, I would have been in a relaxed state. And I was probably on my way to sleep, and then I startled awake and very clearly saw this little
Mm,
baby. And but I definitely was a child who talked to um, animals. I would spend hours with those little roly-poly bugs.
sure. Yeah.
Do you remember those? People would be off playing with their friends, and I'd be like making little cities and towns with my little roly-poly bug friends in the dirt behind the stairs. I mean, I wasn't a normal kid, I guess.
No, but hey, join the right. That's isn't that the way where, that imagination and we're going deeper below the surface of whatever's around us to create our reality in that way, because I think it's so self-soothing for so many of us that are sensitive to be
Mm,
able to kind of step into that space and create for yourself the reality that feels good. And animals and insects and nature are such a grounding force for so many of us.
mhm.
They speak our language
Good
uh,
deal.
without having to speak. So I can understand that. So as you were going back to the first thing that you saw, which is phenomenal and just really amazing to see that happen over time as you got older, if we look at some timestamps of being maybe in the double digits, like 10 and then 15 in your 20s, did seeing things start to pick up, or was it more your awareness of feeling the energy of others start to get stronger? And would you notice it at certain times?
Uh, I wouldn't say that. Well, I definitely started feeling more things when in my early 20s. But I also had a huge major life change. My mom had been diagnosed with cancer when I was about 15. And she held in there, but she did pass when I was 20. And at that point, I had to become very self-sufficient, and figure out my life really fast. Um, so things took a practical turn. But one of the things that my mom had brought into my life before she passed was a uh, the discipline of meditation. She actually was someone who, um, she did the usual cancer treatments, and this was back in, back in the day before, things have turned corners. But she was not expected to live in her first round of being diagnosed. But she took on meditation. She became a macrobiotic. She was doing things that uh, women just did not do. She was reading Shirley MacLaine, anything she could get her hands on that would that opened her up to what she felt was out there, and that gave her comfort on her journey of healing and eventually acceptance that her path was going to end on this plane at the time. Um, and so through watching her pass and being part of her process, I think death came to live at our house for a bit. And we all had to get, I'm not sure comfortable is the word, but we all had to kind of make room for its presence and the absence that was soon to come, lingering over us, and trying to adapt to that. And while living the best life we could with our mother, who had a limited time with us. But she became an incredibly extraordinary woman in that time frame, and went on to do amazing things herself in those few years that she had left. And but I became familiar with the concepts of meditation. Um, and she had a guru and someone that she worked with on mantras, all of which took her into altered states. I'm not sure she would call it that, but essentially trance states that brought intense relaxation, calming of fears, and I'm sure they, at a young age, being introduced to that probably helped me um, a little bit with my own fears around things. I'm going to take that back. I think it probably helped me with accepting that the mind is more flexible than other people were assuming at the time, than what I'd been told by friends, media, and the rest of the world, and more to unusual experiences and expectations. And, yeah, actually, my own when things really heated up for me was probably much later. It was later in my 30s, and I started having a lot of experiences with ghost energies. I'd walk into old stores, and feel in a lot of cold spots, the typical things you kind of hear about. Um, the one that became really out of control for me was when I was doing my background is an artist and photographer, and I was doing an internship with, um, and I was doing an internship and had to find myself a place to live. So I rented a cottage, kind of a carriage house from a local woman, and this carriage house was cute as a button. It was right on the water, and it had these gorgeous fields down to the ocean, and it was very inexpensive. And I should have maybe asked why later.
Surprise.
But it was so cute. It was just this one little tiny one bedroom, and I brought my dogs. But I it turned out to be a nightmare of sorts in many ways. The washing machine and the dryer were constantly turning themselves off. The coffee machine would turn itself on in the middle of the night. Um, I'd come back and from my day at work, and I discovered like my paintings were on the floor. I What finally drove me out was uh, uh, trying to go to sleep one night and feeling a man sit at the bottom of my bed and knowing that there was no one there. And I think actually that night completely freaked me out. I grabbed my dog and we hightailed it out there. I ended up spending the night in a motel, and the motel was no
Oh my, I was just following you around. You were like, get me out of here.
better. I think spirit was definitely, or like something was going on that my sensitivities were ultra heightened. And I later went back to the real estate agent who had rented me this place. And I said, I'm so sorry. I can't stay there. There is a ghost. And she's like, oh, I'm really sorry. The other people who stayed there last time said they felt something too, but I didn't want to really believe it. But yeah, the family who used to own this place, their son had taken his own life in the cottage. And
So that you're like, okay, and that's the place I chose. But what's interesting, Kim, as you're sharing all of this and as your sensitivity started to sharpen, whether you go into the store, you went to this cottage again, and tell me what you think about this, but I find people and individuals who are extremely open that don't step into it. There's a forced opening
mm-hmm.
through our experiences that get our attention. And I feel like there's almost this residue in the atmosphere, the energy of where we go, whether it's an environment, a store, a home, or property, and that those that are kind of tapped into that vibration there, whatever took place, whether the spirit knows it can get your attention, its feelings, I would say that we will share the same energy vibration because we may understand suffering very well. And so we're going to get that spirit's going to get our attention. And so I'm not surprised to hear that not only did you by chance choose that cute little cottage, did it choose you as you're stepping into it? So if you sharing that story when you left there and then the hotel was no better, so it's just following you everywhere. From that moment moving forward, and you're in your 30s, did things start to escalate more in terms of what you would experience? So I always find like when we're getting those ghost experiences and we're feeling the energy around us, it's really this vibrational knocking on our door like, hey, we see you, we feel you, do you feel us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's things ramped up by then, and I was unable to sleep when I'd go to new places. And it became more intense. I started feeling them actually touching my feet. I got more visuals of who it might be, though of course I was telling myself at the time I was just crazy. And um, but I would have names come to me, and it got to the point where I could not travel with comfort. Um, and it was becoming pretty untenable. And at the time, I literally prayed for a mentor to come and help me figure this out. And uh, sometime around in my 30s as well, I mean, it's not all bad. I did have an incredible awakening experience with one evening where I was sitting in meditation, and a loving being came into the room and just glowed in the corner, and I was just tears running down my face with how much love I was experiencing at that time. And it didn't last long. I think it maybe was there for 3 to 5 minutes, and just the love felt so real and incredible. I don't know what it was or who it was, but I'm grateful for that experience. It was incredibly beautiful. I also had another experience when I was gardening in the early evenings. I would go out after work and work out in my garden, kind of take care of weeds and whatnot before heading in before dark. And I started noticing at that twilight time, right before it gets dark, that that liminal state I've now learned. I discovered that when I would look up, it was like I was looking at two different things. I was seeing my garden, but I was also seeing this very soft, gentle mist over the garden, and that my plants were vibrating and almost as though they were glowing from the inside. And it would usually happen when I was tired or kind of zoned out, just kind of doing my rote work, not any, and even when I would try and focus, oh my gosh, what is that? It would disappear. and then I'd relax again and it would come back. And when that started happening, I said, I need to get myself checked out.
Right.
So I got my hearing checked. I got my eyes checked. I was like, I feel like I'm seeing things, and everything seemed to be normal. I seem to be cognitively healthy. Um, so I just accepted, and that's when I really started to pray hard for a guru or not a guru, but a mentor to help me figure this out. So I go to the crystal shops, and in the town and where I worked, there were just these young kids who, had were having fun with the idea of it, and but really had no real understanding. And back then, before the internet, it was so much more difficult um, to take uh, to find people that were trustworthy. You're nodding your head. I can tell that you agree.
Well, right. Like you're going through this experience of seeing energy move through life. And I go back, I'm going to connect the dot to what you said about your mom when she started to get into meditation, and you made a comment that, that we're not our mind, that we are not our body. And
Mhm.
so where our energy is able to go is very much outside of our vessel. And
Mhm.
what we tap into is very much not here. And
Mm.
so as you recognize that in your 20s with your mom, and she kind of instilled that with you, which it's like I always say, we stick these little moments in our back pocket because
Yeah.
at some point they're going to make sense. And then as you're moving through what you're feeling, you feel like you're losing your mind. And then you're seeing the plants, you're seeing the energy and the feeling, the emotion and the energy of these plants at this beautiful time of day, and now you feel like you're going crazy. And if I could put in a room all the people that I've worked with that say, I think I'm going crazy, I'm like, no, you're not. You are feeling and seeing energy in a way
Mhm.
that we have no way to share that with somebody else.
Mhm.
And so then I see you going to the crystal shop, because I find when I stepped into this like almost 20 years ago, like who do you talk to? You don't. And that's part of the journey, that's suffering, because you don't know if you feel like you're going crazy. And the more you either deny it or don't know where to go, it amps up, and then it just builds, and then you're like, okay, something's going on. So I can totally see this all building up as your higher self and spirits like really just trying to show you, like, Kim, we're here, like it's time to move into this space. And as you say, they do that in a way that's gentle, but it starts to amp up. So as you saw all that, you went to the doctors, you were fine, you went to the crystal store, you're like, okay, this is not exactly what I need. I need to find my tribe, my teachers. So when did things start to shift for you to find that the people to work with, or the person? When did that shift to say, "Hey, I am psychic and I actually can connect to spirit"? Like when did you either have that vocabulary, the understanding to step in to find somebody to know exactly what was going on for you?
Well, by that point, fortunately, there were many more books out about uh, altered states or intuition. I mean, it was becoming more popular to read about these things. And I can't remember the name of the woman who was the medium from Long Island. Long Island, Maine.
Teresa. Teresa? Yeah. Caputo.
And I would find myself, my husband is not a believer in it. So I found myself constantly like, I'd sneak in watching her show whenever I could. Like, what is this fascination I'm having with this whole experience? But I think we're drawn to where we're supposed to be figuring out, we're being shown through our passions, what it is that we need to be tuning into. Um, well, for me, actually, I lucked out in that one. We were moving house a few years back, and I felt like there was still a lot of stagnant energy in this house that we had moved into. And my uh, sense was I really should get this house cleared. And I didn't really know what to do for myself. I felt like I could smudge some sage or whatever, but I didn't have any understanding of what that meant to do. But my instinct was telling me this house needed help in being cleared out of old energy.
And, and real quick, as you guys are moving houses, can you give us a little idea of how old are you at this point? And where are you in your life at this point? Who are you with and what's going on?
So I was about I was about actually wasn't a whole long time ago. It was about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you, where is this and what location?
So if I was, it was in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, where I live right
Okay.
now. Yeah.
Okay.
And
And Mayor, like your
married, and I had a son who was, he would have been about 10 or 11 at this time.
okay.
But actually, you bring up a really good point, and so much changed for me when I gave birth. Giving birth was a portal that and I guess all women go through at some point, that when they giving birth was a portal for me. And it was 62 hours of labor, ended up being an emergency C-section. I've never been in such mind-binding pain in my entire life. Um, I still didn't know what my son's name would be until I was pacing the halls at the hospital, and his name just landed like a like a feather in my lap. Um, his name's Finn, and it's uh, the process of giving birth. It broke me open. Um, it connected me with the um, my femininity in a way that perhaps I think I had been denying before. Becoming a mother raised in me such ferocious protectiveness that I had no more time for the ghost energy, bothersome stuff that was happening to me when I would go to places. I saw ghosts much more clearly. I had nobody really to talk to about it, but I was like, okay, there's somebody in that corner, or there's a feeling right there. This, or oh look, there's somebody who's walking behind that this person who's walking towards me. I just, and it wasn't even a conscious thought. It was just kind of this immediate impression that I would get. Um, but I had no more. I had much less fear for this. I was becoming much more practical because I had no time. I was in a very protective, take no prisoners mode as a mother of a young one person. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to add that about. I think there's even a term for it, and it'll come to me in a minute of when the opening that can happen when you become a mother. But it sure happened to me. Um, So years later, we're moving house, and I felt we were in this house that had a lot of old gunky energy left in it. And I could just feel it and didn't know how to really take care of it. I had bumped into this woman at my child's school who seemed to know something, and I said, "Hey, you know, I think she talked about being a um, uh, Reiki practitioner." And I talked to her a little bit further. Turned out she was someone who um, knew felt very comfortable. She called herself a medium, a psychic, and I asked her if she'd be willing to come help me clear out my house. She said, "Sure, no problem." And she came through the house, and she very practically said, "Oh, there's someone here, and you know, this person." Uh, and she named um, uh, some people that seem to have correlation to people in my family, um, and yeah, I was like fascinated. I was like, "Please tell me more, you know, what you do." And through our conversations, I started to share a little bit more. And she said, "Well, why don't you come and work with me, and uh, and we'll explore what you can do together." And that was the first time I had a teacher who I felt had answers. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm finally going to get some answers, not just things that you read in books, but to be able to speak your truth, have it be heard, have it be understood, have it be uh, and helped to mold it into something that could actually be of use to myself instead of something that was either fearful or had to be ignored or had to be swept under the rug because other people would think that you were nuts to even speak about. And there's something about being seen. You know, you think about spirit. I mean, here I am having the capacity to see these things, and unable to be seen myself for who I am. I felt like a ghost in my own life.
There you go. Well, and if you think about that, if we feel like a ghost in our own life, we're not seeing ourselves, then how can we acknowledge what's trying to see us or move through us or live through us? And it sounds like when the divine timing of this person coming upon your path and you just happen to meet them at school, like,
Hmm.
there's no accidents. And
Right.
it's almost like if you look at this little puppet master of the higher self saying, okay, well, let's get her to this school so she can meet this individual that will give her an indication. Because going back to something that you said, Kim, is once we start to step into this, I think it's less about, I heard this somewhere, so I cannot, it's not my words, but somebody had said that it's less about learning and just more about remembering that our
Mm.
souls remember this, and that's why we are so drawn to it. And so
Yeah.
hearing that connection. But I'm going to back up and do a timeline. So when did you get married? Because you met somebody, got married.
Yeah.
So,
Mid-20s.
okay. And then you're going through, and then what were you doing for work? Like, what was your normal day as you're
Yeah.
trying, as spirits nudging you on the path?
Yeah. Well, I actually I went to school for photography and art history in Boston. I went to Tufts in the School of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and learned art history, photography, how to be a functioning human. I got out of school, couldn't find work as a photographer as I dreamed. I actually ran into an enormous amount of um, working sexism in the field. That was absolutely, I don't know how women did it back then. I really hats off to anybody who could make a living as a photographer back then. Um, so I ended up doing temp work at a financial industry. I found I loved it. I loved the practicality and the solidity of numbers. Became a stockbroker down the line. Went into management, went into quality control. I was the person who would listen in on transactions and trades and to see whether or not they were actually being conducted properly, um, uh, for many years. And um, but my first passion was always photography and art, as a career path. Then I met my husband, and continued my work in finance for a few more years, until I had enough money. And then I quit finance and became a photographer full time. I bankrolled myself at this time rather than depending on other people to help support me in the work. And I was a very successful wedding photographer. I photographed the weddings of many political figures in Boston. Um, Lots of time down in Cape Cod and traveling with it. Really, really loved it. I was on the cutting edge at the time of photojournalism photography. Now it's very common, very kind of freestyle and that casual look, combined with beautiful portraits. And that was my specialty at the time. And I had a studio on Newbury Street in Boston. I mean, it was quite a wild time. Uh, it was fun and successful, and I was an anxious wreck in many ways. I was constantly dealing with my anxiety, and it's something that I realized later, being part of a wedding scene when you're hypersensitive. You're shaking your head. It is insane. All the emotions, all the jealousy, I think it's why it made me so good at the work. Like I could manage other people's emotions because they didn't even know themselves what they were feeling. I could like maneuver them around scenarios, but like, or when to step in, when to step back. But it was so anxiety producing. I come back like this shaking mess, having absorbed everything from everybody, the nervous bride, the anxious groom, the mother-in-law, and it just went on and on and on. Like everybody's anxieties, the caterer who was so anxious about whether or not they were going to do the job right. And I could tell when people were mad because they hadn't been paid yet. And like,
And not realizing that you're literally like just merging with that energy and then probably leaving those events in a job, and you're taking probably days or weeks to just decompress and let that go. But was it hearing this for you too, like as you were stepping into the photography and then into your art, like it's that I always say anybody that's in the arts, you're channeling energy through yourself from something much higher. And when we're in that space, you're in that space, you just you're no longer here,
yeah.
right? It's a way. So you got into the photography.
Mhm.
You were doing the stuff with numbers and finances, and it's very like concrete. So it's probably like, okay, this is balancing out the things that I can know. It's a known
Exactly.
first.
Understood it.
And then as you're coming into this, and then you have your son, and you guys end up moving, and then as the energy's picking up around the stuff that you're doing in your day job and stepping into that, um, and I know that you also talked a bit, if we can go there briefly before we really step into the work you're doing as a medium and a psychic, talk about a bit of your artwork, Kim, because that's part of this process in the fabric of who you are,
Mm,
stepping into what you do.
thank you. Yeah. So eventually I realized that I could no longer handle the energy of weddings. And uh, a space became available in my hometown of Portsmouth. And I would drive by it, and something was calling to me about this little storefront. And I was like, what can I do with that space? And I'm going to open up a photography gallery, what I decided to do right before a recession. I thought this was the cutest space ever. It was this little wood floored in classic Portsmouth brick townhouse. And I opened this little art gallery for photography. And boy, photography doesn't sell in a tiny New England town back then. But I was lucky enough to meet some wonderful photographers who did have a little faith in me, and we moved things along enough to keep the gallery limping along. But artists were coming to me at the time. Painters were coming in and wanting to show their work in the gallery. And at first I was like, oh, no, I'm just a photographer, photo gallery. But economic times called for a change. And I think also something else was calling me to change because the people would bring in their art and I loved it. I had so much fun spending time. I would sit in the gallery for hours with these pieces that people would paint, and suddenly I couldn't get enough. I wanted to know, how did you do this? What kind of materials are you using? Oh, you're teaching a class? Let me come. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And like we were saying before, following your passions is where, it can show you where you're supposed to be. And boy, I just took off. Once I started painting, and it's really interesting because my art, I was just looking at this, my art from way back then, 15, 20 years ago, is incredibly similar to the way it is now. It was as though I'd always been doing it. Like you see a lot of people's work and you see a growth. And sure, I do definitely have some technical skills, but I'm painting the same imagery. I'm painting the same scenes. My it's some people I don't think I could tell myself if you were to show me some of my early work compared to my old work. So I really think it was something that I was meant to step into. And so I eventually sold the gallery. Um, was able to start work as an artist when I had my son, and my husband took on a job that he needed to travel a lot for. It just seemed to make sense that I would be stay home with my art and the baby for a little while. So it gave me some time and space to really open that up and explore the flow. And for the first time, I felt like I was actually creating um, something, not just from what I was seeing, because as a photographer, you're reflecting back the world around you. But as a painter, you have to bring yourself more into it. And what's a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the imagery, a lot of my complete love and affection for the natural world was overflowing onto canvas. And having that outlet was extremely calming for me.
And I wonder if you were painting, if you were feeling that connection from your higher self and probably that of spirit that, again, it's not something you were learning, but something that your soul was coming back to because it knew. And so as you talk about that, you're still painting the same way and things can be different technically as you're like maybe ways that you're looking at the way that you're sharing and expressing, but it was always there. And
Mm.
so as you led into that, and we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the podcast about where people can find your work and your art today, that it's extraordinary.
Oh,
And the work that you're doing, it's just incredible. So as you kind of led into that and you're able to kind of really step into that creating, you're at this house, you're now painting,
mhm.
you're raising your son, your husband's working, you guys are at this house, you met this person who was a psychic medium. that I always feel like we have lampposts on our journey. Like there's certain lampposts that we get to, and we're like, I always think of like Narnia and the lamp there, right? Like the snowy little trail. And we have those lampposts that are significant for us. So as you met this person, and there was a timing there for you that it just felt like this is what I need to do. And I feel like when we all step into that, we're just so thirsty for it. Like we you kind of look around like, and you find that one person or that book, you're like, you just hold on to it for dear life. You're like, give me all you've got. So as you met her, how did that start to open up for you and really start to understand that something's happening and you're starting to connect dots?
He saw in me something I didn't see in myself. I thought that I would be learning about my intuition. I thought I would just be learning the structure of the universe and how things work and what is a ghost and what is this spirit's source, like what's its connection and all that. And instead, she was turning the tables on me almost immediately, uh, asking me to read her. And then later, she said, I remember she said so clear, okay, tomorrow I'm bringing in someone else and you're going to read them. You're going to read, and I'm like, what? Like, this wasn't what I signed up for. I just was here to kind of like have this be a fun little side thing of like, I mean, I was hungry for the information, but I had no capacity or thought that I might actually be someone who was going to do an actual reading for someone. And when I say reading, like, I'm not even sure I understood what that term meant. Like, what I don't think I'd even hired a medium at that point. I can't remember, like, ever, like, I know I'd gone to a psychic, but as far as a medium, someone who actually communicated with the dead, that was something else. And
And I
for
think, not to interrupt you, but I think some of us that step into this, like many of us that don't know where the path is going to take us, I think even for myself, the last thing I thought was like, I'm going to read for like, what? You're bathing in the light of the medium and the psychic, like just give me everything and I will be happy with that and I will hold on to it. But then you're like, I'm going to do this. And so when that starts to happen and that urge, as you said, you're like, I'm going to do that. So I really relate to that because I think a lot of us are saying, I can't do that. So anyways, not to interrupt you, go ahead.
so she said, well, that's it exactly. That's surprise and like so. But I have to say, my work as an artist, just to back up a second, had led me into a path of being. I was different than other moms. The fact that I was this artist figure in the community, it kind of put me a little bit on the outer fringes, a place that I had never been before as a professional, both working in finance and then even as a photographer, professional photographer. Those were all careers that were kind of acceptable. When you become an artist and you start saying, I am an artist, you become a little more fringe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there's something in me that was like, well, I guess I need to just accept that. And so my identity was shifting a little bit from being mainstream into already something that was a little more fringe. And I just want to kind of bookmark that for as we talk about this the arc of what happened. So yeah, she brought in this other a woman I guess she'd been working with, and uh, I was the woman wasn't allowed to say anything but really yes or no, and I was to just start sharing my impressions. And they were to me, they just felt extremely um, simple. I had no idea. I just kind of opened up. I kind of tuned in, meaning I just kind of went into my meditation space, um, and listened. And the things that were brought to mind were very simple. Like this morning, I'd been reading an article about a brother football player, and for some reason, that just kept popping into my head, popping in my head. And I said, I'm really thinking right now about a brother who's a football player. And she's like, oh yeah, my brother's a football player. And I said, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety around that. And she's like, well, yeah, I feel that too. He just had an accident, And so the conversation just kind of built, and suddenly I was knowing and saying things that I had no idea that I was just becoming a channel for as I relaxed into it. And by the end of it, the message that came through wasn't actually anything that I remember. She said, well, finish up with a message. And I was like, well, what message? Except for that when I tuned in, all of a sudden, and oh my God, I got hit with this wave of love that I had not experienced since I sat with that angel figure in my bedroom, and that's meditation all those years ago. It was exactly like this, just love, acceptance in on steroids. And I was crying. I was just crying. And I was trying to tell this other person what I was feeling for them from the person on the other side. Um, I think that was probably the most beautiful and frustrating experience of my life. Being able to have them feel it, but they could feel it in some senses. I was expressing it to them. Yeah. So that was my first reading was wow.
And to be put in that situation, and I think you just said something really important about, and I can relate to this, that you said that just this overwhelming feeling of like love and acceptance. And I think part of what spirit does in our higher self is not only in the work that we're doing as the conduit for others, but it's really the acceptance, Kim, and love of ourselves.
Mhm.
That's only going to allow us to step into this work the way that we need to. Because if we cannot hold that for ourselves, how can
Mhm.
we possibly be a conduit for others in that way? So I think for me, what I've noticed is it's constantly challenging me for self love and
Mhm.
for acceptance. It's easy to give that to others, but it's sometimes very difficult to give that to ourselves. I don't know if you felt that.
Mhm.
It's humbling, right?
Mhm.
Um, but to hear that of her saying, okay, only yes or no, which is a great exercise, like to say yes or no, and you're like, okay, am I on the right path? But what you just described about, and I love this, you describe something as you're tapping into somebody. And, as we talk about this with mind mapping and the point of reference of what do you know that's familiar to you? And you were, seeing something about a football player and then anxiety with that. And you're like, well, I'm just going to go with it. Because a lot of times when we're tapping in, we are tapping in blindly, which we should be. We're just like, I'm going to give you something that makes absolute no sense. And
Mhm.
it's the things that are the most wild and most random and most disconnected from us because it's not our stuff that always seems to hit and land. And so as we are sitting there channeling, I have found it's so, I'm still in awe of what comes through and
Mhm.
being a part of that process with the sitter.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you find that for yourself as you are starting to open up and really understand how you connect, the sense of awe that I hope that anybody who does this work, they never lose that
Mhm.
because it means that we don't expect what's coming. How could we?
Mhm.
And every opportunity to work with a client is showing us something new, a facet of understanding of a connection that we didn't have prior to that meeting that person.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
so as you shared that beautiful experience of that beautiful energy that you saw so long ago that it was coming in,
Mhm.
I also say, let me know how you feel about this, that it's that validation for us. We're exactly where we need to be, right? You can't deny the feeling that we feel when we start to connect with someone and an energy. Like you cannot deny the sense of ease or peace that that brings. And I think for myself, and I'll ask you how you feel, sometimes there comes to that worthiness, like, am I allowed to actually do this for a living? Because it feels so pure, it feels so easy to connect, and it feels so right that there
Mhm.
can be this feeling of that I've got to find challenge in it, or it's got to be difficult, or I have to judge myself to make it
Mhm.
worthy of it, right? There's got to be this sense of struggle uh,
Mhm.
versus just being in it and
Yeah.
then stepping away from the reading and being like, wow, that was extraordinary.
Yeah. Could be no denial that what had happened in that room that day was extraordinary. And I knew right away that it was, as you talked about before, you remember into the work. And though it's not without its learning curve for sure. L- Stepping into that energy, stepping into that flow is a muscle that takes work to develop. And I don't mean just mentally, but I was physically exhausted. I slept almost the entire next day. I felt, I was like, what is wrong with me? It was like being hungover, um, plus running a marathon for me the next day. And that has since dissipated. But and fortunately, that my teacher at the time was very wise. She said, it's a muscle, Kim. You just need to keep going. And I was like, no, I need to stop. I need to stop. This is not meant for me. I can't. This. How could this have been meant to be if I'm so exhausted? Um, but and I'm so glad I kept going and worked my way through it.
Right? Like when you were doing that, and even when I'm teaching students, like from the time they come into the class to the end of the day, there's an exhaustion that you can't put into words. It's an exhaustion, like you say, that physical, mental, emotional, spiritual exhaustion that you have to build it like an endurance. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon when we're doing this work.
Mhm.
And some sessions can wipe you out more than others. And I can understand like that first time you connected that way, you must have been just completely wiped out. And then you start to question, like, is this right? Is this wrong? When you after you had that first session, so that was your first exposure working with this teacher and then having that experience, what started to happen? Show us along the line. So that happened. And then did you start to do more of one-on-one work with people? Like how did you start to really step into that to really start to build and understand your abilities and really start to accept them maybe or understand them more?
Yeah. So at the time, once I did a few more and felt, and things became easier. I wasn't quite so exhausted. So I want to equate it to, when you first get a new job and you go into your new job at work and you come home and you just want to sleep the next day.
Right, right. Yes, yes, yes. That's a great analogy. Yeah, it's true. Ugh.
But I, uh, yeah, so it just lit me up. I loved it. The only thing that became too much was I was unable to not cry at sessions. I would just cry and when every session I had with someone in spirit would come through, and I would feel the love and or I would feel the sorrow from the other person about for their lost loved one. I would just cry and feel so emotional about it. And I said, "What do I do?" And I realized I needed to ask spirit to I needed to ask my guides to tone it back for me. And I did that. I had one meditation session where I asked my guides, and it was like they shut the switch off. It was like night and day. It
I
was
mean,
just the very next session, there was no problem. I didn't, and I kind of missed it. But at least didn't all become about me having this sobbing session, right? As I'm doing a reading, which is somebody else's emotions. I'm sure it must have been very discombobulating to have the medium crying with you.
but it happens in the beginning, like you're trying to regulate like what you're feeling. You're merging with somebody, you're actually feeling those emotions and those in spirit. And maybe if there was trauma and deep, deep sadness, like it's hard to separate and that just like we say, it's a muscle. We have to train that. But for you to go and ask and go to spirit and go to higher self and guides to say, listen, I need some, you set that intention, which is so important to do that it's simply asking and setting that intention in our work before we start to help set the parameters.
Mhm,
And as you said, I love that you did that and it changed the game because I think that when we do have emotion, it does kind of blur what can come
mhm,
through a clear lens. But that's part of stepping into this and understanding how we work and our vessel works as a tool. So
mhm,
as you asked and you stepped into that, your process. So if you were to let us know that as you stepped into this, you met her, you started working with her, she's your mentor, you started working with people, when did you start to step into this to realize that maybe this is something that I want to do for the public? Like, what journey did you go through in those about 5 years, the last 5 years, to really step into understanding that this is pulling you to share your light with others?
mhm. I think, uh, well, the mentor at the time, she said to me, "Well, where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself in the back of the crystal shop giving readings?" And I was taken aback. I was like, "What? Like me? Like what? No, no, no. People don't want that from me. What is that?" But I found I kept coming back to the table, and I started joining other practice groups. Started taking classes where I could in order to understand better what was going on. And I got to a point where I felt so called to it that it was really sustaining me in between. The times between became more of anticipatory. Oh, I'm going to get to do another practice class or whatnot. Until the point where it felt more like my real self, my real life. than my real life was. Um, and eventually that actually led me to you. And I was like, oh, someone said there's a medium down in New York. And by that time, so within mediumship and within the spiritual world, there are a lot of directions you can go. There are so many directions you can take it into, hypnosis or spirit work, and or work with a particular deity or a priestess, or become a spirit guide specialist. And I found that I had run my course with my mentor and was really still looking more for um, the direction I needed to go, but I knew that I needed to step off that path and find my next one. And that's when I bumped into you, actually, as I called, made an appointment. I just loved your energy. I loved how practical it was for you. Um, it was so no nonsense. It just felt so normalized, and yet what was happening and was that by the end of our conversation, I was changed. I felt different. I felt like I had new information and experiences that I hadn't had before. And I was like, I need more of that. I need that practicality. I need that clear sightedness. I need that connection, the assumption that everything that we're working towards is within the scope and path of the divine, of the highest and best good. There was just no question of that when I started working with you, and that has brought me back again and again for tune-up classes, and every chance I got to have an opportunity to work with you, I would definitely take it.
Well, Kim, thank you. And I've got to just say to that there is something extremely rewarding. And I've always said this, and again, this is something that I've heard, and it comes from another source that, when the student's ready, the teacher arrives. But I think also the whole point of teaching others is to create other teachers,
Mm,
right? Because what I witnessed in watching you when you came in and the work we've done together is I would always leave our time together in such awe of watching you do what you do, because anybody who steps into this work, you have to appreciate and respect the way other people connect, because it's uniquely different from your own as it needs to be. And there's an awe to that because everybody has a key, their own key to this, but to witness somebody unlock that and to connect, that's a gift.
mm,
Even as a teacher, the whole goal is for the students to become the teacher and to show me something,
mm,
right? To show their process. And I think that's what makes an important teacher, to allow the person to be who they need to be in their own mediumship, in their
mm,
own psychic work, not mine, not the other teachers, but become your own and really support that. And when we had worked together, I would watch you work and the exercises that we would do. I'm just like watching you, Kim, and if I could record that, I'm like my jaw is dropped. I'm watching this. And I do this myself, but it's different when you're watching somebody connect in their own practice, because what that simply means is there's others out there, because it takes a village to help people. We need more. And we
mm,
need people that not everybody's going to connect with me. Not
mm,
everybody's going to be our fit. And so, what we want to do is to reduce that suffering, to create connection, to say, hey, I've got just the right person for you, and to be
mhm,
really honored with that. And one of the
mhm,
reasons having you on the podcast is I love watching your journey, Kim, and the vulnerability of just saying, there's something bigger than us it's like something pushes you out into the crowd to say,
mm,
just go. And you're like, I'm not ready. I'm not like, you're going. And it's so humbling and
mm,
so inspiring at the same time that you just can't walk away from it. You push yourself to get uncomfortable every day,
mm,
and to see the work that you did and the work that you came from with your first mentor and the teachers that you worked with shows the degree, Kim, of how much you are a part of this. But what I really see with you is the way that you really connect with others, and that but I don't like to use the word gift, because the gift means that it's a gift for certain people. It's the ability and you stepping into your tool to be
mhm,
that connector for others that drives in the work that I see that you do.
mhm,
And that, just such respect, because it's so needed in a way of authenticity and integrity, and always trying to, we never stop learning with this. We never
mhm.
should,
No, yeah,
right? And I
you're
think it takes certain teachers. I think I always tell my students, like, work with many teachers. We need to figure out who you are and the fingerprint of your own work,
Mhm.
and then own that, step into it, because I think that there's a lot of comparison in this field, and it
Mhm.
just wipes away the natural ability of who that person is, because there's only one Kim Case, right? Like, let's
Mhm.
honor and cherish that, and really celebrate her. So our work together, as you stepped into us working together, that eventually, what started to happen after that, as you're going into all these methods and these modes over the years, when was that deciding factor, Kim, where you're like, okay, because I remember it, you're like, and I have a website. I'm like, yes. I remember you said this. I'm like, okay, so can you just walk us through what that was like to say, I'm ready to do this? Was there a defining moment? And I know that when we decide to go public, and I don't know, I would love to know your thoughts on this. And I know the first time I ever put up my sign and I changed from Blue Tree Reiki to Psychic Energy Works, I was terrified.
Mhm.
Um, but I was too consumed in the energy of what other people thought versus just owning my work and doing it, regardless what people thought. Because it's
Yeah.
the people that needed it that I was a disservice to by not talking
Mhm.
about this is I'm here, this is what I am and what I do. And so
Mhm.
by doing that, I honor the other people who need that.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about that moment that you decided to step into this and really start to honor what you do, and what that looked like and what you went through?
Mm. Well, two things are coming up. The first is that it was not a straight trajectory. And the work teaches you where you need to keep learning. The uh, developing a website and hanging my shingle happened strictly because I couldn't get enough practice sessions and I couldn't find enough friends to be my victim and to be read. And it was quickly becoming awkward. And I realized actually that maybe reading your friends is not the greatest thing to do. And we can talk about that later. But
But when all you have, you're like, well, that's all I have right now.
it's
So
all I had right now, right? So how do I attract other other people to this? So I started putting out into, I think there was some forums or whatever on Facebook. I couldn't get anybody to respond. And so I finally said, screw it. So I posted I made up a little website and I put it on Instagram and I said free readings and nobody came. Nobody came.
crickets.
Kids. What should I do? And I think I probably had a conversation with you about it. And you said to just charge. And so I was like, what? Charge for this? But I did. And then, oh my God, as soon as I started charging, people came in droves. I could not keep up with the demand, actually, when it came through. And I just couldn't keep up with it. People needed that value. People needed me to value myself.
And that was the thing. And I think with this work, we don't, even if it's at a very discounted price, your time is worth the investment of what you put into yourself to develop that connection. And so to do that. So that's an interesting, because I see a lot of this happen. Like, well, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm not going to charge them. Like, there's got to be some energy exchange because it's just an
Absolutely.
investment. So you go to charge and then you're getting all these people coming.
I was so overwhelmed. And actually it was far more than I didn't there's becoming a medium, it's a business side of it. And you need to be able to have that management in place. And I didn't have any of that in place. I mean, yeah, you want to learn from somebody who started off doing this all wrong, but that's, study my my process. First, I didn't charge. Then I charged and became overwhelmed and had no systems in place. I couldn't book far enough advance. I created a waiting list. Um, I think at one point I had 200 people on my waiting list. I mean, that would have kept me busy for 2 years or something crazy. Like, um, and of course, a lot of people who sign up for waiting lists don't actually fall through, but it was keeping up with what I had was more than I handled. And at some point, I, and in doing the work, as we said before, I learned where I needed to learn. And part of me realized I didn't have enough language within myself to manage other people's two things. I didn't have enough process on how I want to say the word protect myself, but how I create boundaries for myself about how much energy I'm willing to take on. I didn't know how to um, handle the incredible grief that was coming at me every day. Um, and and when I say handle, I don't mean just energetically. I mean like these are fragile people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to be careful in the language that we use.
Absolutely.
And I was finding I would just go in I was just thinking, okay, I'm just going to connect here with spirit and say whatever comes out. And I thought, I'm not sure I was always that. Uh, I'm sure there were more than one time when I wasn't, when I was speaking callously,
Mhm, mhm.
where I wasn't. To be a good medium, you have to be not only channeling spirit, but you have to stay awake and alert enough in the present moment so that you're able to manage what's going on between you and the reader and understand how much information they can take and how to deliver it in a kind and loving manner.
It's a translation process and a great deal of
Yes.
responsibility of being in that space dependent upon the client and the sitter that you're with, right? And that it's a humbling situation to be in where you are like patting your head and rubbing your belly
Mhm.
because you're getting this and then you're also trying to hold space for the person you're working with. So I can imagine, Kim, that there was a learning curve for you as you went through that. But that's the stuff that teaches us, right? It's like I always say, like, stay humble in this work because not one session is it's going to keep us humble. We're never going to get it right. But those sessions allow us to fine tune how
Mhm.
to connect.
I am so glad I had a mentor like you in my back pocket to kind of check in with because those were really kicking my ass. And I ended up stopping for a period. In fact, it was the summer after I began. I pretty much shut things down. I kept the people who were on the books, but I just delayed everything. I think I even wrote a note. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to fill this for now. Where I just had to take some time in order to revisit what needed to happen and decide for myself if this is something that I could handle and how to do it. And I found I missed the work terribly, and I wanted to. And I was still reading, and I became a lot more in tune with my spirit guides. I needed I needed not just the support of a mentor, but I needed someone with me on the ground as we're doing the work to help me regulate. And I hadn't yet developed a really strong relationship with my spirit guides. I had a sense that they were out there, but I didn't have a real. Ooh, my screen just blinked. I don't know if you saw that. They're just checking in, letting me
They're
know.
like,
They're like, we're doing things like really trying to imagine what they look like, and I started giving them names. I have no idea if that's really their name or not, but it just helped it to make it easier to have conversations with them, um, and ask for the kind of sessions that I needed to come forward, and boy, they delivered. So yeah, things feel now much more supported, much more. I also did take the time as well to look into grief, to read up on grief and how to speak to people about grief. Not to use placating language and not to turn the story in on yourself and share. Oh my, well, I know that must be so sad because I had my own sad experience. Even though of course we almost all do, but really being a much better listener
mhm, mhm.
is so important.
It's
Um,
so important.
not everybody. Sometimes people come to you and they think they want to talk to the dead, but really there's something else going on. And I needed to, and it used to be I'd sit there and like someone would come through and the person would be like, yeah. And then the session would go dead and I felt like a failure and I was refunding people's money because I felt like I had failed. And what I realized is the only thing I'd failed at is uncovering the need that they showed up for.
Mm.
Because what I was saying wasn't wrong. Spirit is always right. Maybe I need help in interpreting. But what I needed to work better at, and the only way to do that is to be a better listener
Mhm, mhm.
of understanding what people are there. And not just, yes, listening to what they say, but also listening to the energy they're projecting and how they're feeling. Um,
And that comes into, as you're sharing that too, Kim, that evolvement of this guidance a bit of holding space for them. And I've come away from mediumship a bit. I'm always going to be a medium. I still do mediumship, but I noticed that when I was in sessions, if you're saying this right now, it's a coming to the surface of what's translated for me in the last 2 years is that I would be connecting to spirit with a client, but I was really drawn to their present state emotionally outside of the spirit I was connecting with. And so I almost felt spirit kind of back up and my attention went to them
Mm,
because there's a temporary fix almost of connecting with spirit in that moment and having that beautiful connection. So I would never take anything away from what that does because
mm,
it's an extraordinary place of healing. But what I noticed is that as the messages came through and the spirit kind of backed up a bit, there was this space to connect with them. And that's where the intuitive guidance piece and the work to really help them in the living
mm,
started to take over and become more and more and more as I've
mhm,
evolved more into that intuitive guidance. So as you're saying, being a listener, we're listening to the energy, we're feeling their energy. And I think that because at the core of you being a healer, you know, spirit's always great. Spirits
mm,
like they're just swimming around and I always say like warm Caribbean water, like, hey, water's
mm,
great, everything's good up here. We're in that place of wholeness. The
mm,
stuck energy is what's here physically.
mhm.
And so things start to shift because you do see that beautiful connection, but there's something missing with the sitter, right?
Yeah.
Feeling something that the connection cannot fix.
Mm,
Doesn't dismiss it or not make it significant, but there's something about their suffering in the here and now
mhm,
that for me, it was a non-negotiable. Like it was an urge to say, what can I do to help and
mhm,
find that peace for them? So as you're saying that about listening, that also gets into the responsibility of like, what do you do in a session then? Like, have you
mhm,
found it start to change for you in what you're doing in your sessions now. And just to explain to the audience that mediumship is a way of receiving information from spirit. So we are in this deliberate connection with spirit to receive information and to share messages and information and evidential mediumship to the clients. But there's also this place where we are tapping into them psychically to their
mhm,
present energy now
mhm,
that can start to incorporate into a reading.
mhm.
So there's psychic energy, which is perceiving, and then mediumship, which is receiving. So for you, Kim, how have things started to shift with you as you are finding your place and your groove and your vibe with this?
Well, I'm kind of laughing because the first few times I realized that more needed to be said was, or paid attention to in a different way, was literally spirit. Like, so I'd see the person's father, or actually, I think it was in this case, a particular father over this young woman I was doing a reading on. And he was telling me about himself. And we were more than confirmed that it was him. But he kept like, in my with my third eye, I could literally see him using his hands and pointing at the young woman, like
Yeah, yeah.
just like pointing at her. As I wish you could see me now, I'm like pointing at, like using both his pointer fingers and pointing at her, like put the conversation back on her. And so I was like, I think he really wants to talk about you now. Like, what's going on with you? You're going through something. And then they would, and that took me a little while to transition into helping them figure out what it is that they're like really wanting to bring up, whatever conflict or turning point that they happen to be at, like what it was. But it was, so you talk about how did I know? It's like, well, spirit was literally showing me. They were like literally pointing at me. And that happened more than once until I got the message that, okay, we're done talking about them. They don't want to talk about themselves anymore. They know, they're here. We know they're here. They want to talk about you. What's on the plate here? And let's get into it. Um, and then and actually that can be really magical in itself, because you start going and uh, um, usually I'll get some kind of a frame about the conversation, the direction it needs to be. Then people can't help themselves. They want to pour it out there, what it is. And then from there, okay, we'll be able to say, um, spirit will really show me where the sticky parts are, especially where their fears are. And being able to work into that fear a little bit in order to tease out what's in their control, what isn't in their control, and how they can move forward. And that is so beautiful. And there's this one session my spirit guides are really wanting me to talk about, if that's all right. Can I share with you? And it
Yeah.
literally happened to me last week. It was a gentleman who was coming through, and I don't know. I know you deal with a lot of men, but I don't see a lot of men. They just haven't been people who have been curious or come to me with a lot of curiosity about talking to the other side. So I was very curious. Okay, this gentleman comes through, and even more curious. He's older. He's an older gentleman. He's older than me anyway, and I was like, and I just had this sense of dread about the session. I was like, something's this isn't going to go smooth. I can feel it. Usually I get a sense of excitement or like some kind of an inkling ahead of time that the direction of it, and this just wasn't giving me that same vibe. But he came through, and I talked to him about how I work and how I work generally. It's somewhere between a radio station and playing a game of charades that we do together in order to determine who comes through. And they'll show me things, and together we connect the dots. And he was fine with that. He was just kind of non-committal, and a woman came through very strong for him, it was a relative of his, and he just didn't seem to care. Didn't seem to care. And eventually things petered out. Spirit just kind of drifted off. I wasn't getting anything. I had that dreaded moment of like, what is going on? And he's like, well, let's see. I have these 100 questions to ask a medium. And I was like, what? He Googled what to ask a medium because he'd never seen one before. And I was like, how did you find me? And it turns out it had been gifted to him. The session had been gifted to him from another client. And that person felt very strongly that he should have a session with me. She'd had a good experience, and she wanted this gentleman to have one as well. But one of these questions he'd Googled was to ask about his health. And I had to say that I don't go into health. I find that it would be irresponsible of me as not a medical professional to go deeply into. I'm not a health psychic. I don't have that particular skill, and I certainly don't want to be under the responsibility of reading someone's future health-wise, because that can really influence how people feel about themselves and their situation too. It can either install fear or false hope, and I don't want to work about in those waters right now. And so, and I explained that to him, but there was something about health that kind of kept returning into the conversation. And it turned out that the gentleman did have a very major health issue that was very much weighing on his mind. And and that he was living with a lot of fear on. And uh, through the conversation, we were actually able to kind of psychically dig into that a little bit and sort out what that was about and the different layers that were affecting him in his current life. Um, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you think is going to happen when that time for you to cross over comes? And he's like, well, I'm going to be like a worm in the dirt. I'm just going to be dirt, right? That's what happens. And I just felt such sadness. Um, and myself saying, well, I talked to an awful lot of dead people for that to be the case. He kind of I kind of cracked him up a little bit. That was the first time I kind of got a little smile out of him, and I could feel something shifting there where became more open to it. And I ended up talking. And I cannot remember what I said, but I did talk about my own experiences, and I did talk about how I came from finance and didn't believe in any of this, so that he could have that perspective of my own turning point as a reference. Um, and at the end of our conversation, and talking about what I do believe is on the other side waiting for us, which is quite beautiful, he said, wow, so you're saying that I might actually have something to look forward to. And I just got chills.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of this session.
The whole
Was
point.
session was to get to that moment
And
of a small window for him to open up.
for you to share that, and also that, I mean, there's a stacked deck for you stepping into this, right? So one of the first stacked things is that when someone is gifted a session and they're not initiating the session, mean, that to begin with anybody, because you don't
Yeah.
know where their comfort level is, what their understanding is. And so you had that. And
Mm,
then coming in and not really connecting to the spirit that was there. And so many times as mediums, like we can deliver what we get. Doesn't mean it's always going to land, or it just doesn't make sense at the time. So then you're
I think that's the right way, but he didn't care.
but he wasn't wanting the connection. He's like, that's not what I want. Like, okay. And then he has like Googling like what. And so if you're like, okay, he doesn't really care about that connection, and then 100 things to ask a medium. And then you're right about the health piece, because we're not medical intuitives. We're certainly not doctors. And I mean, maybe there's doctors who are trained as mediums, but even with that, the health piece, and even when I am looking into someone's health, it's from a perspective of energy, vibration of balance. Like I might see something, but again,
Yeah.
it's a disclaimer that we're not medical intuitives, and you can go to a medical intuitive in conjunction with your doctor, but that's
Mhm.
the right place to go. And I think when someone has that worry and they come on with something very specific, it can
Mhm.
block the beautiful things that need to come through. But what you did, Kim, is you went there in a place that I have found in this work, that it's all about really finding connection and trusting who you work with, but that trusting who you work with is really just a reflection of you trusting yourself.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it sounds like what you were able to do, which was beautiful, and I'm not surprised, is you were able to allow him to disengage, to to pull down the fear of it, and
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
hear something that brings some type of alignment.
Mhm.
Even if he stepped into this wanting something very different, or wondering what it was, because as we step into these sessions as psychics and mediums, we want someone to leave in a much better space than when they stepped into it, right?
Absolutely.
There's that place of really, we don't want to call it performance, but we want them to leave because we can feel that suffering, or that sense that something's like it's not finished. So sharing that story and connecting those dots for him a bit, or something for him to think about,
Mhm.
that's beautiful. And that's also another example that every reading is going to be different as we step
Yeah.
into. We have to be flexible
Yeah.
and fluid with who we're going to approach.
Mhm.
But I also want to add that you felt something even prior to stepping into that reading, and we have to honor that.
Mhm.
And I've had a hard time myself over the years of knowing when to stop. And it just had to happen. It just happened to me about 2 weeks ago, that they weren't feeling the reading was really connecting for them.
Mhm.
And it was a very psychic, intuitive based reading, and I could feel that blockage. And so
Mhm.
it's not on them and it's not on me, but as we are commanding the reading, we have
Yeah.
to know when to say, listen, we need to try this at another time. I'll refund your money. And it's a hard pill to swallow,
Mhm.
because there's much emotion and energy stepping into a reading from that sitter.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, because I can relate to that. And I'm sure
Mhm.
anybody who does this work can relate to that.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's about timing and how they're showing up to and what they're wanting the expectation with the reading, which can hinder a lot of things too.
Mhm.
But I love what you were able to provide, and that humor. And you connected some dots, but you also allowed him to maybe understand something that might have been a little difficult too, and put some context to it.
I hope so. There's not a lot of times where I allow myself a lot of pride in the work because it does feel more remembered than it does something that I've actually done. But that was a moment where I walked away and I just was almost overcome with the honor that I had been given, that my guides, his guides, had felt and trusted that I would be there to do and say what needed to be done, needed to be said. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that, and like I said, we need to stay humble, because we don't know, how could we possibly know what's going to take place? And I think it's those moments, those sessions in particular, that teach us the most of like the curveballs will always come.
Mhm.
It's not a cookie cutter. And
Mm-mm.
as you were able to handle somebody that may have been skeptical or not sure about this, and I think for the work that I do, Kim, and even you talked about in the way that perhaps I teach, it's about making sense of it, and
Mm.
can make sense of something, or at least connect some dots. We trust it.
Mhm.
And I think trust is so incredibly important, not only with somebody else, but especially ourselves, and allowing that you allowed that for himself. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm. Yeah.
I can relate to a lot of it. for sure. So, so going forward, as I know, this might be I might have to put this podcast into 2 episodes. But
We can
I,
keep talking forever to you.
I could just keep talking to you forever. So,
Uh,
as you stepped into this, I guess, Kim, tell the audience a bit about how they can work with you, what that looks like today, your offerings.
yeah.
And I think we're going to get back on another podcast at some point because I have so many other questions for you. But for now, it's a great starting point of sharing your journey and in what you do to step into this work. So before I have you share the audience about where they can find you, I want to ask you one other thing. What does mediumship mean to you today in psychic work and maybe in a way that you would describe it for yourself, somebody else wanting to step into this? Curious.
I, gosh, yes, please, we need you here. The universe needs us here. I don't know, some crazy. I heard some weird quote like "Hmm, 8 million people die every year." It's a lot of people to die, and that's a lot of people who are in grief. And people are really so hungry right now, and the portal is open that people want to understand. They want to have a sense of what the the order of things could potentially be. They want to know that that we do go on, that the soul is bigger than um, anything that we can imagine. It's certainly much bigger than who we are in this one tiny moment of time at this particular place. Him sitting in our office on the phone. We are so much bigger, and the capacity is within all of us to reach out and be forgiven. And people ask me, well, how do I know if I have the skills? And I say, well, how passionate are you? How driven are you to find out? And you'll find out. The For me, it was a lifelong journey, and from almost everybody who I've ever mentored, it's been the same. They just had a sense, an intuitive sense that there was more going on in the world that they needed to find out more about, and just didn't know how to capture it. Even for people who are just waking up to them, I've talked to a couple of definitely successful people who are come to this work later and just needed to be shown a direction to move into. Um, so mediumship is is a service. Um, Period. It's a service that we agree to let ourselves be channels. We come with a willingness to trust that what we're doing is here for the best and highest good. And every time I sit down, I set that intention for making that work. Um, it is an adjustment. And I think everybody has to make a decision for themselves whether or not this kind of a lifestyle is for them. You can explore and get to know your intuition. You do not have to go out there and become a medium just because you learn how to talk with people on the other side. Um, but if spirit has brought you to that place, the hard work is already done.
It's just making the decision,
It's
right?
just making the decision. Yeah.
And the nudge, the whisper, the calling just gets louder and louder. We can go on with our life and skip along, and eventually we'll be tripped. And
You'll be tripped, or the signs will come in, and you'll suddenly have 10 feathers on your doorstep.
right. But I love your explanation, and you know it's needed. And again, one thing I want to really emphasize is anybody stepping into this work for mediumship and psychic work, and however you step into that, it's needed. Whoever you are, and the energy that you bring is uniquely yours, and to develop it that way. And it's not about what someone else is doing, my mediumship or Kim's mediumship or anybody else's. It's honoring your path and showing up because the unique piece of who you are, Kim, is Kim.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
and that's the part that's beautiful. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing all of that. And I think one of the next times I would love to have you on is we can maybe talk about how difficult it is to step into our truth with this and the
Mhm.
journey we can have of really the conflict of who how we see ourselves and how we are
Yeah.
with the world, right? Okay, so how can we find you? Let us know about how they can work with you.
Thank you. So I have a website. It's rootedmediumship.com. That's ROOTED, mediumship.com. And I'm on Instagram at Rooted Mediumship. Um, and yeah, it's all there.
Work with you remotely, in person? How does that, what's the,
Yes. So right now I just work remotely. Though if you are local to the Portland area, I do have an office space that I can have access to. But for right now, I'm just pretty much remote.
what I also want to add is they can find you, they can book online to work with you.
Yeah.
And the majority of it is remote. And in addition to your mediumship, Kim, and you do some mentorship and all the work that you're doing to hold space, how can they also find you in the incredible art that you do as this other beautiful facet of your energy? Where can they find you in that space?
Oh, thank you. So I'm at kimcase.net is my art website, and I've been represented by the Portland Art Gallery in Portland, Maine for about 10 years now. So they have all of my work that's for sale.
Fantastic. Beautiful. We'll put all the information in the show notes, and we'll be back on again together, Kim.
Oh my God, what a pleasure to talk to you. What an honor to spend time in your energy and experience, reflecting back all that has happened. And yeah, it's amazing.
No, thank you. And I'm just as honored and appreciative, and just to watch your journey and to be alongside you in the work you're doing for others. I'm honored and look forward to talking to you again, and we will. But thank you for being here today and sharing your journey. It means so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take good care.
You too.
Thank you.